Very good morning to my friends and family from Brumley Baptist Church. Hope that you're doing well and that you are having a good weekend so far, whenever you may be listening to this, whether it be Friday, Saturday, Sunday, whatever time you might have picked this up as we get it posted over the weekend. Maybe even from last week, you're coming back and catching up. We're glad to have you along, however you may be listening to us. First and Second Kings has been our location for the last 3 or 4 weeks, and we're going to continue in First Kings today, chapter 11, the first 13 verses there, with the idea of compromise. Ungodly partnerships lead to spiritual compromise. I will be candid and tell you I'm recording the biggest part of this during the early part of the week when I have some extra time. And so I'm not sure at this point, as I record this, exactly what the Southern Baptist Convention did this week. I will tell you, as I record this, there are several really important votes. Who will be our pastors conference president, who will be the president of the Southern Baptist Convention, what sort of things we will align ourselves with. Based on how those votes go, we're either going to stand firm on biblical inerrancy and some things that are really significant and important, or we may compromise some of those things to be more in line with what the world around us looks like, because we want the world. The last couple of years, the theme that has been quoted many times by lots of folks in the convention is the world is watching. My response to that remains, who cares? Who cares if the world is watching? God is watching. And that's what we should be more concerned about. From 1 Kings 9 to 11, which lays chronologically with 2 Chronicles 7 through 9, there are 3 different kings over the United Kingdom: Saul, David, and Solomon. At that point, the kingdom breaks and is the divided kingdom, which we'll get to in the next few weeks. Solomon builds the temple. He gets it in place in Jerusalem. It is beautiful. It is incredible to look at and to be at. It's a wonderful structure. But that doesn't mean the presence of God is there. Just because the building is nice and everything looks good from the outside, it doesn't mean that everything is good on the inside. When we pick up the story, we're a little over 20 years into Solomon's reign, and he's done a lot of things well, but he has done some things unwell also. He has compromised in some areas that he should not have compromised. And it's those things that we're going to take a little closer look at today. Again, the theme: ungodly partnerships lead to spiritual compromise. Let's start with 1 Kings 11, 1 through 3. Warning ignored. King Solomon loved many foreign women in addition to Pharaoh's daughter: Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women. From the nations about which the Lord had told the Israelites, you must not intermarry with them, and they must not intermarry with you, because they will turn your heart away to follow their gods. To these women, Solomon was deeply attached in love. He had 700 wives who were princesses and 300 who were concubines. And look in verse 3, they turned his heart away. God had been very clear with his people not to intermarry. And he tells us not only why, or not only what to do, but why we shouldn't do it. They'll turn your heart away. I know as a husband and as a father, my family is significant in every decision I make, maybe the most significant factor apart from God in every decision I make. They will turn my heart whatever direction they are going. That is just a fact of life, good, bad, or otherwise. That's just a truism. God knows this, and he tells Solomon, don't put yourself in that position. He gives him a warning. Hey, don't do this thing, because if you do this thing, it will lead to that thing. Like, here's the exact why of everything. And Solomon doesn't pay any attention to it. And so verse 2 says, or verse 2 says, Solomon was deeply attached in love. And I love the way the CSB rends that Hebrew phrase, deeply attached. He can't get away. He is literally, the word means ensnared in some places. That has more of a negative connotation, but it's probably more accurate here, because they've turned his heart away. They have pulled him away. So he has completely ignored a warning God gave him for a reason. If we ignore the warnings God has given us as a people, as a convention, as a church, as a nation, whatever it is, then we will find ourselves in trouble as well. just as Solomon did. Because of this, he has a divided heart. When Solomon was old, his wives turned his heart away to follow other gods. He was not wholeheartedly devoted to the Lord, his God, as his father David had been. Solomon followed Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Milcom, the abhorrent idol of the Amorites. Solomon did what was evil in the Lord's sight, and like his father David, he did not remain loyal to the Lord. At that time, he built a high place for Chemosh, the abhorrent idol of Moab, and for Milcom, the abhorrent idol of the Ammonites on a hill across from Jerusalem. He did the same thing for all his foreign wives who were burning incense and offering sacrifice to their gods. Yikes. In just 3 verses, we went from a divided heart to now a completely ungodly king doing abhorrent, ungodly things. Verse 4, notice the phrase, when Solomon was old. His life of disobedience did not begin when he was old. The seeds were planted a long time before that, and that's what sin does. Sin festers and germinates and grows. It's not always an overnight thing when you make a wrong choice and say, look, nothing happened, I'm fine. Well, years down the road, those consequences spring up. The evidence that Solomon was not wholeheartedly committed was in his wives turning his heart away to other gods. Ashtoreth, the goddess of the people of Sidon, or the Phoenicians. She was a fertility goddess and considered the wife of the god Baal. Worshippers believe Ashtoreth and Baal were responsible for fertile wombs and for high-yielding crops. Milcom was also called Molech, the war god of the Amorites. Worshippers would sacrifice their children to Molech by burning them to death. Solomon erected a high place to Milcom, and Chemosh, whom the Moabites considered to be a savage god of war. Can you imagine the king, God's chosen king who built the temple, and now he's doing these other things? Just for reference, I'd say that I step to the pulpit Sunday morning and I start preaching Hinduism and Buddhism, and all these other beliefs, and not just other religions, but terrible religions, child sacrificing religions, Baal and Molech, and these awful, terrible non-deities. You look at that and you say, how in the world did Solomon, who was the wisest man who ever lived, fall prey to these things? That's because he had ungodly partnerships, and slowly they pulled his heart away. Again, not all at once, not overnight. It wasn't just instantaneous that he looked up and, wow, yesterday I was serving God. No, but slowly and steadily. It's a slow fade. And that's exactly where Solomon found himself. The Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. He commanded him about this so that he would not follow other gods. But Solomon did not do what the Lord had commanded. Then the Lord said to him, since you have done this and did not keep my covenant and my statutes, which I commanded you, I will tear the kingdom away from you and give it to your servant. However, I will not do it during your lifetime for the sake of your father David. I will tear it out of your son's hand. Yet I will not tear the entire kingdom away from him. I will give one tribe to your son for the sake of my servant David and for the sake of Jerusalem that I chose. Discipline always happens after sin. Always. Sometimes it's instantaneous. Sometimes it takes a few years. Sometimes maybe it's given to other people around us instead of directly to us. But God disciplines those he loves. Just like I, as a father, will discipline my own children because I love them and I don't want them to choose the wrong thing. I want them to only do what's right. These are significant things. And when Solomon slowly and surely made these choices, it had long-term effects on not just him, but on his descendants. The divided kingdom is a dark period in the Old Testament. We're going to dive into it next week specifically. But it's a harsh, rough period in the Old Testament. And it happens largely simply because Solomon did not listen to what God told him to do. Isn't that sad? That one man can cause so many others to hurt. Dear friend, we should all be careful that our sins don't cause those around us pain. God's warnings are given for our protection. He doesn't just give rules, arbitrary rules to do certain things and not do certain things to ruin our fun, or just because he wants us to follow a certain set of rules. They are for our protection. Just as highway signs and road lines and highway laws are given so that we're safe when we're driving, God gives us rules and lanes to stay in for our protection. God has a reasonable expectation that we would only worship him. He is the only true God. So as Peter said, when Jesus asked that incredible question in the New Testament, are you going to leave me too? Peter said, where else would we go? God holds his followers accountable for their disobedience all the time, every single time. We're always held accountable for those things. So we need to be sure that we always remember that. Thank you for joining me this Sunday morning. I pray that you have a good week. Again, next Sunday, we will dive into the divided kingdom in 1 Kings chapter 12. Until then, have a good and godly day and go serve your King. Yeah. And it's just